Nihilism explained. It is one of the most unsettling ideas in philosophy. At its core, it says life has no built-in meaning, no absolute purpose, and no universal morality. The word gained momentum in 19th century Russia, where young radicals used it to reject church authority and political traditions. A few decades later, Friedrich Nietzsche made it infamous across Europe when he declared God is dead, warning that the foundations of Western morality were collapsing. What makes nihilism feel so vulgar is the logical consequence. If nothing has true value, then anything could be permitted. That thought has been tied to political chaos, destructive ideologies, and even extremist violence. At the same time, it has inspired art, literature, and existentialist philosophy. Dostoevsky's novels wrestled with its dangers, while later thinkers asked if people could build their own meaning instead of inheriting one. Even today, surveys find growing numbers, especially among young people, who describe life as meaningless, showing nihilism still echoes in our culture. Its legacy is double-edged. It frightens us with emptiness, but it also frees us with possibility, forcing the question, if the universe is silent, what story will you choose to write for yourself? Hedonism explained. It is the belief that life's ultimate purpose is pleasure, that happiness means maximizing joy while avoiding pain. The philosophy began in ancient Greece with Aristippus, who argued that chasing immediate enjoyment was perfectly rational. On the surface, it feels logical. Why suffer if we can choose pleasure instead? But here's where it turns vulgar. When pleasure is pursued at any cost, it often destroys the very life it promises to improve. History gives us vivid examples. Roman emperors drowning in feasts and excess, their empires collapsing under indulgence. Modern parallels aren't far away. Addictions, endless consumerism, and reckless lifestyles turn the pursuit of joy into emptiness. Studies even show that people who relentlessly chase pleasure often report lower long-term satisfaction. Proof happiness isn't found in indulgence alone. Yet hedonism also sparked change. It challenged rigid moral systems and inspired movements for freedom, sexual liberation, and personal expression. Today, its legacy is everywhere. We condemn it in public, yet society markets it to us daily through entertainment, shopping, and media. Hedonism reminds us of a paradox. While pleasure is essential, when it becomes everything, it leaves us with nothing. Machiavellianism explained. It comes from the 16th century writer Niccolo Machiavelli, whose book The Prince became one of the most controversial guides to power ever written. In it, he advised rulers to use deception, manipulation, and even cruelty when necessary, claiming it was better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. At the time, this shocked Europe, where politics was still expected to follow church morals and traditional virtue. What makes Machiavellianism vulgar is its cold message. Morality doesn't matter, results do. That logic has inspired dictators and cunning leaders throughout history, and even today it shows up in everyday manipulation. Modern psychology now calls it one of the dark triad personality traits, alongside psychopathy and narcissism, linked to dishonesty and exploitation. Yet the reason it survives is simple. Ruthless tactics often work. Power tends to reward the cunning. Its long-term impact is everywhere. In politics where spin overshadows truth, in cutthroat business practices, even in toxic relationships where people are treated like pawns. Over the centuries, Machiavelli's name itself became shorthand for betrayal and manipulation, proving how one little book reshaped how we think about ambition, power, and trust. Egoism. It is the belief that self-interest is the root of all human behavior and morality. The idea traces back to early Greek thinkers like Epicurus, who argued people naturally seek pleasure and avoid pain. But in its rawest form, egoism strips away compassion, claiming even kindness is just self-gain in disguise. The vulgar side appears when self-interest becomes the only rule. Helping others becomes a trick, trust breaks down, and society feels like survival of the fittest. You can see this mindset in ruthless business practices, toxic leadership, or subtle, everyday manipulation. Modern psychology even links strong egoistic traits to narcissism and low empathy, patterns consistent with the dark triad of personality. Critics argue egoism erodes community, leaving endless competition. But defenders like Ayn Rand reframed it as rational egoism, claiming self-focus can drive progress, innovation, and creativity. That's why its legacy is etched into today's culture. In capitalism, where ambition is celebrated, yet selfishness is condemned. Egoism forces a question that hasn't gone away. Where's the line between healthy self-love that builds growth and destructive greed that tears everything apart? Social Darwinism. It is what happens when Charles Darwin's theory of evolution gets twisted into a dangerous worldview. In the late 19th century, some thinkers claimed survival of the fittest applied not just to animals, but to society itself. The rich were seen as naturally superior, while the poor, the sick, or the colonized were branded as weak and undeserving. That idea gave moral cover to some of the worst policies in history. Colonial expansion, racial segregation, forced sterilizations, even the rise of eugenics movements were all justified as natural law. By the 20th century, its influence reached deadly extremes, feeding into fascist ideologies and genocides that killed millions. The vulgarity of social Darwinism lies in its cold attempt to turn struggle into a moral rule, stripping away compassion and reducing people to winners and losers. Science itself rejects this abuse of evolution, but its echoes haven't disappeared. You can still hear it in harsh rhetoric about poverty, class, or immigration, where success is praised as virtue and struggle written off as weakness. Social Darwinism's legacy is a chilling reminder. Not every scientific theory should be used as a guide for morality, because when nature's law excuses cruelty, humanity loses. Fatalism. It is the belief that everything in life is already determined, and nothing you do can change it. From ancient Greek tragedies to Hindu and Islamic traditions, the idea of destiny has appeared across cultures. At first, it can sound comforting. If fate controls everything, then your struggles aren't your fault. But the vulgar side of fatalism is its power to create apathy. In everyday setbacks, disasters, or even injustice, it whispers, "Why fight if it was all meant to be?" Studies show fatalistic beliefs are tied to higher acceptance of poverty and even shorter life expectancy, because when people believe outcomes are fixed, they often stop trying to improve them. Yet paradoxically, fatalism can also provide peace. In some cultures, surrendering to destiny is viewed as strength, a way of coping with suffering by trusting in a larger order. Its legacy lives in literature, religion, and philosophy, from tragic heroes destroyed by fate to prayers that surrender life's outcome to a higher will. Fatalism sits eternally between comfort and despair, reminding us how the idea of destiny can both lift people up and quietly hold them down. Cynicism. It began in ancient Greece with Diogenes, a man so rebellious he mocked wealth, rejected comfort, and even lived in a barrel to prove society's values were absurd. At its heart, cynicism promoted freedom from corruption by stripping away illusions of power and luxury. But the vulgar version is the cynicism we know today, a deep distrust of everyone and everything. It sneers at love as fake, paints governments as always corrupt, and insists people only act out of selfish motives. That outlook may feel realistic, but taken too far it corrodes trust, relationships, and community. Research even shows chronic cynicism raises risks of loneliness, anxiety, and heart disease, literally wounding both mind and body. Yet there's another side. Cynicism has been a powerful tool in satire, politics, and revolution. By calling out hypocrisy, it clears the fog of lies and forces people to see reality. The legacy of cynicism is double-edged. It makes us laugh at corruption, but can also drain our hope. At its best, it exposes the truth. At its worst, it poisons everything it touches, leaving us trapped in suspicion instead of change. Misanthropy. It is the outright hatred or distrust of humanity. From ancient Greek tragedians to modern philosophers like Schopenhauer, misanthropes describe people as greedy, violent, and doomed. Writer Jonathan Swift captured this feeling in Gulliver's Travels, portraying humans as yahoos, disgusting creatures unworthy of respect. The vulgarity is obvious. To despise the species you belong to is to reject empathy, community, and trust. History shows misanthropic thinking has fueled everything from individual isolation to extremist movements that literally wish for human extinction. Yet misanthropy isn't always born out of pure malice. It often grows from disappointment, endless wars, political corruption, and environmental destruction that make humanity look like its own worst enemy. Today, you can see modern echoes online in nihilist and antinatalist communities calling humans a plague on Earth. Their message reflects despair rather than outright hate, but the impact is just as sharp. Misanthropy's long-term legacy is a warning. Too much contempt for people can turn either inward, creating lonely isolation, or outward, inspiring violence. It forces a hard question. When we lose faith in humanity, do we fuel change, or do we simply walk away from the world? Pessimism, Schopenhauer. It turned pessimism into a full philosophy in the 19th century. He argued that human desire is endless and mostly painful, meaning life is more suffering than joy. At its core is the idea that the world is driven by a blind, cruel force he called the will, leaving human freedom an illusion. The vulgar side of pessimism is its bleakness. If life is inevitably miserable, why keep fighting at all? That dark message gained traction in times of crisis and inspired writers like Tolstoy, Freud, and even Nietzsche, who wrestled with Schopenhauer's shadow. Statistics today suggest pessimism isn't just a mood, it can shorten life itself. Surveys show optimists outlive pessimists on average, proving outlook alone can influence health and survival. Yet despite its heaviness, pessimism left a huge cultural impact. It shaped Wagner's tragic music, existential novels, and modern psychology's fascination with suffering. Its long-term legacy is both chilling and valuable. Schopenhauer forced people to confront pain honestly, pulling back the curtain most would rather ignore. Even if his answers were bleak, he made us face the truth, that suffering isn't the exception in life, it's the rule. Sadism, de Sade's philosophy. It takes its name from Marquis de Sade, an 18th century French nobleman who scandalized Europe with writings that glorified sexual cruelty and domination. To him, true freedom meant acting on every violent impulse, no matter how taboo or destructive. The vulgarity of sadism is obvious. It finds pleasure in the suffering of others. Courts jailed de Sade for decades and branded him a monster, but his work lived on in secret, reshaping literature and philosophy. Modern research shows sadistic traits aren't rare. About 6% of men and 2% of women report enjoyment in cruelty, proving his ideas were not just fantasy. Sadism later influenced art, psychology, and vocabulary itself, giving rise to terms like sadomasochism. But its darker legacy is chilling. The same mindset has inspired violent crimes, abusive ideologies, and entire cultures of entertainment built around watching others in pain. Today, de Sade's name is eternal shorthand for human darkness. Some hail him as a prophet of absolute liberty. Others see him as evidence of the abyss desire can unleash. His lasting impact is a warning. When freedom ignores empathy, cruelty ceases to be the exception and risks becoming the rule. Anarchism, nihilistic strain. It is usually described as opposition to governments and authority. But its most vulgar strain is nihilistic anarchism, a call for no order, no law, no institutions at all. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this extreme vision turned violent. Anarchists carried out bombings and assassinations across Europe and America. Even U.S. President William McKinley was killed by an anarchist in 1901. Their logic was simple but brutal. Destruction must come first, because freedom could only rise from ruins. Not every anarchist supported this violence. Many pushed for workers' rights, social reforms, and experiments in collective living. Yet the violent faction left a lasting mark. Chaos became tied to the word anarchy, overshadowing its ideals. This vulgar side celebrates tearing down authority without offering anything to build in its place. Today, anarchism still lingers at the edges of politics, from fringe movements to black bloc protest groups. Its legacy is conflicted. It has fueled radical hope and social change, but also explosions, assassinations, and fear. In the end, anarchism forces a question that haunts history. Is absolute freedom a path to utopia, or just a doorway into chaos? Eternal recurrence, dark Nietzschean. He proposed one of the most unsettling thought experiments in philosophy, eternal recurrence. He asked, what if you had to live your life, every single detail, on repeat forever? Every joy, yes, but also every heartbreak, mistake, and trauma, looping without escape. Nietzsche didn't mean it literally. He used it as a test of strength. He believed only those strong enough to embrace life as it is, even its darkest moments, could shout yes to the eternal return. That affirmation, he argued, marked true vitality. But the vulgar side is obvious. For most people, the idea feels nightmarish. Reliving pain endlessly raises despair, almost a form of psychological torture. Modern studies show that when people imagine endless loops of their worst memories, anxiety spikes sharply, proof that the mere concept shakes us. Yet eternal recurrence left a long shadow. It influenced existential philosophers, artists, and even physicists who wondered about repeating universes. It challenges us not with science, but with attitude. Its lasting impact is a personal test. If you knew life would repeat forever, Would you curse it in despair, or finally choose to embrace every moment as if you wanted it back again? Radical relativism. It is the belief that truth and morality depend on perspective, shaped by culture, society, or personal experience. But radical relativism pushes it further. Nothing is absolutely true, so anything can be justified. The vulgar edge here is obvious. If no murder, lie, or cruelty is ever objectively wrong, then law, ethics, and trust collapse. Human society can't work without at least a few shared rules. Critics from Plato to modern philosophers have attacked relativism for exactly this reason, warning it dissolves justice itself. And yet, relativism reshaped the modern world by fueling tolerance. It forced people to recognize that what feels true in one culture may not hold in another. That flexibility has helped societies reduce conflict and embrace diversity. But radical relativism's influence is undeniable. In surveys, over 60% of college students in the U.S. now say morality is subjective, proof that many see good and evil as moving targets. Its long-term impact is a paradox. Relativism empowers us to understand one another, but its extremes leave us with no solid ground. It can be a tool for freedom, or a step into nihilism, where nothing matters at all. Absurdism, dark Camus. This, made famous by Albert Camus, begins with a clash. Life has no built-in meaning, yet humans can't stop searching for it. That tension itself is the absurd. Camus didn't say to give up. He urged us to embrace the conflict and live fully in spite of it. But the dark side comes when absurdity feels like a cage instead of freedom. In times of tragedy or crisis, nothing matters can spiral into apathy, depression, or despair. History shows suicide rates often spike when societies face instability, a grim echo of the crushing weight of the absurd. Yet Camus pushed back against surrender. His famous claim was that the real answer isn't death, but rebellion, choosing to live defiantly without needing final answers. That defiance has inspired art, literature, theater, and even psychology, where people are taught to create meaning through choice and action. The legacy of absurdism is sharp. When life feels empty, we are still free to act. Its vulgar side is despair, but its brighter lesson is resilience. That meaninglessness doesn't have to crush us. It can challenge us to keep living, not because the universe explains why, but because we choose to. Objectivism, extreme. He, created by Ayn Rand in the 20th century, declares that rational self-interest is the highest virtue. It celebrates logic, independence, and capitalism, while rejecting altruism as a moral duty. Rand argued that individuals flourish by pursuing their own goals without sacrificing for others. But in its extreme, objectivism turns vulgar. Compassion can be dismissed as weakness, and those who struggle are seen as failures. Her philosophy elevates the self so high that empathy often vanishes. Critics accuse it of fueling greed, glorifying inequality, and hardening a winner-take-all mindset. Still, the influence is undeniable. Rand's novels like Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead sold over 25 million copies, inspiring entrepreneurs, political leaders, and millions searching for certainty in an age of collectivist politics. Surveys even show her books remain among the most frequently assigned in U.S. colleges, rivaling Shakespeare, proof her ideas still shape debate. Objectivism's legacy is sharp and divisive. It hardened the conversation between capitalism and communism, selfishness and sacrifice. For some, it's noble independence. For others, it's vulgar selfishness. Either way, it remains one of the most polarizing philosophies of our time, still challenging societies to answer. Does rational self-interest elevate us or erode us?